Good morning, students. Today I'll explain the fifth chapter from Footprints Without Feet. And you can see the chapter itself name is also Footprints Without Feet by Herbert George Wells. So, student, the name of the chapter is Footprints Without Feet, and the title itself indicates that this is the story about an invisible man whose feet are invisible but his footprints are visible. So I'll read the story and I'll discuss the word meaning and I'll explain the entire chapter line by line. About the author. Herbert George Wells was an English writer. He was prolific in many genres, writing dozens of novels, short stories, and works of special commentary, satire, biography, autobiography. He is now best remembered for his science fiction novels and is often called the father of science fiction. The two boys started in surprise at the fresh muddy imprints of a pair of bare feet. So, student, this is the story about where the two boys they are surprised. They started surprising when they found the muddy imprints. Imprint means the impression of a pair of bare feet. Bare feet means uncovered feet. Why were they surprised? Because they saw the impression of bare feet, but they were not able to see any person. What was the barefooted man doing on the steps of a house in the middle of London? So they were surprising because they were thinking, who was the barefooted man? What was he doing at the step in a house of a middle of London? And where was the man? And they were not able to see the man, but they could only see the footprints. As they gazed, a remarkable sight met their eyes. When they gazed means look steadily or look intently. When they looked intently to the impression of the footprints, a remarkable sight met their eyes, and a notable sight they saw. A fresh footmark appeared from nowhere. And what did they see? They saw a fresh footmark in front of them appeared from nowhere. They could only see the footprints, but they were not able to see any person. Further footprints followed one after another, descending the steps and progressing down the street. So they were following the footprints one after one another and descending, and those footprints were descending down the steps and progressing means moving down the street. The boys followed, fascinated, until the muddy impressions became fainter and fainter. The boys followed. So the boys started following the footprints and they were fascinated means they were very attracted. Because why were they attracted? Because they were surprising. They could only see the impression, and they were eager to know whose footprints were those actually, until the muddy impressions become fainter and fainter, and they were followed those footprints till the time the muddy impressions become lighter and lighter, and at last disappeared altogether. And at last all the impression of bare feet were disappeared. The explanation of the mystery was really simple enough. As for those boys, these bare feet stories was very mysterious. But according to author, the story of this mystery was simple. So let we proceed and find out what is the easy explanation of that mystery. The bewildered means puzzled or confused. The bewildered boys had been following a scientist who had just discovered how to make the human body transparent. So, student, this was the story of a scientist who had discovered how to make the human body transparent, or we can say invisible. Griffin, the scientist, had carried out experiment after experiment to prove that the human body could become invisible. So that scientist's name was Griffin. He had done so many experiment after experiment to prove that human body could become invisible, become transparent. Finally, he swallowed certain rare drugs and his body became as transparent as a sheet of glass. So eventually, finally, he swallowed. He had certain rare drugs. Rare means exotic, and we can say some expensive medicine he took, and he made his body transparent just like a sheet of glass. Although although his body is as transparent as a sheet of glass, but it could it also remain as solid as glass, but it could be touched by anyone. Brilliant scientist though he was. Although he was very brilliant, he was intelligent. Griffin was rather a lawless person. Although he was very intelligent, but same time he was very lawless. Lawless means the person who doesn't obey any law. His landlord disliked him and he tried to eject him. And he was not liked by his landlord. And his landlord always tried to throw him out or remove him from his home. Eject means to throw out. In revenge, Griffin set fire to the house. So, taking the revenge from his landlord, what Griffin had done? He put the house on fire. To get away without being seen, he had to remove his clothes. So he wanted to escape from his landlord and the people from the people over there. He removed all his clothes. Thus it was that he became a homeless wanderer without clothes. And thus he became a homeless wanderer. Homeless wanderer means a person who had no home and roaming here and there without home, without clothes, without money, and quite invisible. So now what happened? The Griffin, he burned the house of his landlord into fire, and he left his clothes, and he became homeless. He became, he didn't have any clothes. He was without money and he quite invisible until he happened to step in some mud and left footprints as he walked. He was invisible till the time he didn't put his step in some mud and left footprints as he walked. And he made some footprint when he moved. So, students, these were the footprints of the scientist Griffin, which were followed by the two boys in London. He escaped easily enough from the boys who followed his footprints in London. So, the Griffin successfully escaped from the boys who were following his footprints in London. But his adventures were by no means over. But his adventures were not over there. He had chosen a bad time of the year to wander about London without clothes. It was midwinter. So now the author is saying that the Griffin had chosen a bad time roaming in London without clothes because it's midwinter and it was very cold. The air was bitterly cold and he could not do without clothes. And the air was bitterly means extremely. And the air was extremely cold and he could not do without clothes. And it was not able to survive him without clothes in the winter. Instead of walking about the street, he decided to slip into a big London store for warmth. He thought instead of walking about the street, wandering about the street, he decided to slip into. He decided to get into. Slip into means get into a big London store. A big store in London for getting himself warm. Closing time arrived, and as soon as the doors were shut, Griffin was able to give himself the pleasure of clothing and feeding himself without regard to expense. So the Griffin was waiting for the evening time when all the shops in the store were about to shut, and that time he got into the store and get the pleasure of clothing and feeding himself. Without regard to expense means without paying anything for his expenses. He broke open boxes and wrappers and fitted himself out with warm clothes. So he broke and opened the boxes and wrappers and he took out the warm clothes and put on himself. Soon, with shoes, an overcoat, and a white brimmed hat. Soon soon he wore the shoes, an overcoat, and a white brimming edge, a white brimmed hat. He became a fully dressed and visible person. Now he became a fully dressed. He dressed up himself and he could be visible. In the kitchen of the restaurant, he found cold meat and coffee, and he followed up the meal with sweets and wine taken from the grocery store. So, in the kitchen, he had eaten cold meat and coffee. Then he followed it with the sweets, wine, and which he had taken from the grocery store. Finally, he settled down to sleep on a pile of quilts. If only Griffin had managed to wake up in good time, all might have been well. So, here the author is saying if Griffin had managed to wake up in proper time, he might have been saved him from the assistants. As it was, he did not wake up until the assistants were already arriving next morning. But he was sleeping till the time the assistant were approached him next morning. When he saw a couple of them approaching, he panicked and began to run. When Griffin saw the staff of store were approaching towards him, he became scared and he started to run. They naturally gave chase, and all the people were chasing him. In the end, he was able to escape only but by quickly taking off his newly found clothes. So he could escape from all these people by only taking off all the newly clothes he wore. So once more he found himself invisible but naked in the chill January air. So once again he made himself invisible, but on another way he became naked in the chill January. This time he decided to try the stock of the theatrical company in the hope of finding not only clothes but also something that would hide the empty space above his shoulders. So this time the Griffin had decided to try the stock. Stock means it refers to the props of a theatrical company, some theater and all, like artificial mustache, artificial nose, artificial anything, so that he could cover the empty space above his shoulders, like his face, his neck, his nose, his eyes, etc. Shivering with cold, he hurried to Drury Lane, the center of the theatre world. He was shivering with cold. Again, he became naked, so he was feeling so cold. He hurriedly ran to the Drury Lane, the center of theatre world. He soon found a suitable shop. He made his way invisible upstairs and came out a little later wearing bandages round his forehead, dark glasses, false nose, big bushy side whiskers, and a large hat. To escape without being seen, he carelessly attacked the shopkeeper from behind. So he escaped without being seen by any person. Without caring, he attacked the shopkeeper from the back side, and after which he robbed him and he took all the money which he could find from the shopkeeper.